Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin, and today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the DC Coalition for the Homeless with you. But first, I want to begin by talking a little bit about myself. So I am a senior animal science major, getting my minor in nonprofit leadership and social innovation. I was born in Maryland, but a lot of my family is from Philadelphia, so I do call myself a Philly fan. My goal in life is to work with wildlife and do conservation research, and one day I hope to do this for a larger nonprofit. And I am in the midst of currently applying to graduate schools to get my PhD in biology. And a little bit of background about why I chose the nonprofit that I did was because my family and I really love to travel. So here are some pictures of where we've been over the years. We have traveled to a lot of different cities, so I have really firsthand seen the homeless community. And even though we have traveled back to a lot of places and I've gotten older, one thing still remains when we go back and visit these places is that the homeless community is still there. And I have really seen what poverty has done to people. So I really wanted to choose a nonprofit that's sole focus was getting people off the streets, but also making them financially stable so that they'd never have to end up in this situation again. So a little bit about the nonprofit. This nonprofit is a 501c3. Their mission is to not only assist the homeless with housing, but also to make them economically self-sufficient. They have 8 different program sites across DC. As you can see through this picture, they are kind of scattered around the central parts of DC. They have both housing and direct social services. They provide temporary housing for up to 6 months. They also provide permanent housing, family services, and other services such as job training, counseling, substance abuse, help with resumes, etc. They used to have 2 facilities for families, but now they only have 1. So their main focus is helping males get off the streets. Their website does list requirements for being able to receive housing, and some of these include not having a police record in the past 30 days, being disease-free, and also not consuming any alcohol. So to go over a little bit about my SWOT. So some of the strengths for this nonprofit, first is that they receive a lot of their funding from the government. And this both is a strength and a weakness, as you'll see in a future slide. But they have a very diverse staff on board. They have 8 different programs scattered around DC, which really helps them increase their outreach. And lastly, because they provide housing and social services, this sets them apart from a lot of other nonprofits who just provide housing. Some of their weaknesses include their lack of advertising and following on social media. They rely a lot on just their staff instead of volunteers, and their staff wages are therefore very high. They have a lack of diversity in those served. As I mentioned, they really only serve males and not families or women. And then they have very expensive housing, especially because of the COVID pandemic. So some of their threats include that there are many other homelessness nonprofits in the areas with similar missions. So it often gets confusing trying to figure out which one is which. Not only the DC population is increasing, but our world population is increasing rapidly. So the number of people they are going to have to help is dramatically increasing. The COVID housing crisis is really increasing the price of not only land costs, but also rent in many places. And also, as I mentioned, the government funding can be a threat because it could get cut at any point. It's not a stable source of income. But opportunities for this nonprofit include having a very diverse staff. This can increase their outreach to many different parts of the city. Their ability to make partnerships with other nonprofits with similar missions to increase their resources and funding. Their ability to increase their advertising. They don't have anybody listed on the website who does this as a staff position, so hiring someone that can do this could be very beneficial to them. And finding additional sources of funding, especially with the staff that they do have, maybe reaching out to private donors or other companies. So a little bit about their organization and leadership. They have 11 total board members, 4 officers and 7 board members. They have 2 executive directors and 7 other listed staff positions on their website. They have 4 individuals on their advisory board. As you can see through these pictures, their board and staff are pretty diverse. You see men, women, people of color, and people of various ages. Both of their executive staff members have actually served in the organization for many years. One of them has actually just reached over 20 years in the organization. So this is very different to what we have talked about with the high turnover rates of staff in nonprofits. So this really helps bring some stability to this nonprofit. So to go into their financials, this is their 990 tax form. So as you can see, they're bringing in almost $7 million in revenue just from government funding. However, their expenses are very high, especially their salaries for their employees is over 80% of their revenue. So they're only bringing in $66,000 a year for growth. And as you'll see on a future slide, they are actually bringing over some money from previous years, which is helping them with their other expenses. I wanted to add this slide in here because you can see how much they're spending for advertising and promotion. It's only $930 for the past year. This was 2018, 2019, which is the most recent one I could find. And they're only spending less than $1,000 on advertising and promotion, which is really decreasing their ability to find additional funding sources outside of the government. So this is an audit that was done by a private company. And as you can see, they list all their different programs on here and how much they cost. So their total program services are costing just over $6 million, which based on their revenue, they would not really be able to afford unless they were bringing money over from previous years. So just to summarize their financials, majority of their revenue is coming from the government. They have minimal revenue from other sources. Their biggest expense is their salaries and wages. They are carrying some money over from previous years, which is helping with their total costs. Their transitional housing program is the most expensive out of all of them. And overall, the total grant contributions from the government have decreased from 2014, where they totaled almost $10 million, and now they're under $7 million. So some of the challenges for this nonprofit includes that they have no partnerships with other organizations listed. They have a small overall revenue when you compare it to their expenses. They have very high wages for their staff and minimal volunteers. The majority of their funding comes from the government, which is a very non-stable source of funding. We see increasing housing costs because of COVID and the reliance on word of mouth for other sources of funding. So some of the recommendations that I had was to gain more partnerships, and these should be partnerships with other nonprofits with similar missions. For example, they could also partner with a 501c4 to give them a little boost in their political advocacy. A lot of funding for poverty and homelessness come from the government. So being able to increase their reach politically would also be able to hopefully increase their revenue from the government. It would give them more resources, more volunteers, and just a bigger platform to get more recognition for what they've done. Secondly, I would recommend them gaining more volunteers and relying on those volunteers more so than their staff. I don't want to say that they should cut all their staff members, but they cannot really expand with the current revenue that they have. So they can, if they gain more volunteers, they can expand without hiring more staff. And lastly, I think they have room to grow in their social media and advertising. First off, when I looked at their website, they didn't have any positions listed that had anything to do with communications or outreach or social media. So I think they could hire someone or get a volunteer to participate in this and increase their social media outreach. And not just rely on word of mouth to get additional sources of funding. They should really be reaching out to more local companies and private donors in order to increase their funding. So that is it. Thank you so much.